Charlton, we are live.
Okay, can I start?
Yeah, you can. You are now on stage. Yeah.
Okay, just share my screen. Okay, hi everyone. I'm not. Can I get a quick response if you guys can hear me well and see my screen? Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, so good evening, and my name is Charlton. I work at CloudSEK, and thank you for whoever has joined this small and basic presentation on how do you do Recon and web analysis, right? Web application analysis. So just to start out with giving everyone on this meeting a quick run through of what's going to happen. This is a very basic web application analysis presentation that I'm going to do, and this would be a lot, suited for anyone who is getting into the cybersecurity or into information security or into just bug bounty, right? Just learning how to use the internet. So before I start out, I would like to start out with a quote by one of the greats, Mr. Abraham Lincoln. He says that, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 hours actually sharpening the axe." So what this means is that, before you actually get into a project, right, we take the first few minutes to actually plan and organize a project that we are doing, right? And if we rush through it, there are possibilities of making mistakes or wasting of time, right? So we need to narrow down as to what the problem statement is and move on from there, right? So let's start. All right. So today we are going to cover subdomain enumeration, port scan analysis, subdomain takeover, analysis of JavaScript files, and web content discovery. So basically, if these concepts are new to anyone, it's fine. At the end of the session, we can obviously open up, the event to a question answer session, right? So these are the topics, and let's move into it, right? So basically, when we are talking about recon, so what do we mean, right? Let's just look at the definition of the word recon, right? So reconnaissance is a very military-based term that is used in getting as much information as we can, right, on a target, right? This target can be a person, this target can be a company, or this target can be a group, right? But in terms of security, why do we actually call it recon? Well, it is basically getting as much information as we can on that particular target, right? And information in the sense that, how are they hosting their content, right? What frameworks are they using? What libraries are they using? What databases are they using, right? So all this information will basically benefit us in getting more data on that particular company or on that on the target, right? So who is the target, right? So basically we wouldn't want to cross the limits of it being against the law. So you can just ignore the first slide where I said literally anyone, but this would be solely based on an organization or a company where we're trying to bring value to, right, and trying to increase their security posture, right? So most of the time, you can find out companies listed on bug bounty platforms, or this presentation might even be useful for people who are doing things internally and have gotten permission of using open source tools, right? So how do we perform recon? Well, we need to define quite a few things first as to what domains are in scope and not in scope. So sometimes we have clients where or companies, where they are only based in India, or some of them are based in India and part of them are also in the US, right? So there are like different TLDs, right? Top level domains. So there can be on a on a .com domain or a .in domain, on a .org domain, all this kind of stuff, right? The next thing is we figure out what domain they're using, and then from there we move on to domain subdomain enumeration, right? Then we identify what technologies they are using on those subdomains, and then from there we move into a port scan, right? So moving forward, let's start. So subdomain enumeration, right? So there are multiple tools that can be used for this particular activity, but I have just listed four in this slide. And there are two ways of primarily doing this, right? So we have a lot of resources on the internet where we can get, subdomains passively or actively, right? Actively, when I say, like, it's a little intrusive, right? So they would know that, their name servers would know that, oh, okay, hey, actually, there's a request from this particular IP to get these subdomains, whether they exist or not, right? And we'll go into detail about it. So tools that you can use to actually get subdomains are cert.sh, census, Amaz, and subfinder, right? So cert.sh is basically where it's a platform that collects certificates. So basically, when an SSL certificate is issued to a company, there is an IP address and a name or a domain name that's associated with that subdomain, right? So this is one place from where we can get subdomains. The next one would be Census. This is a really good platform. Again, you can search for certificates, you can search for IPs, or even if you only have the domain name, you can get more data, right? So for example, I put Amazon.com. Now I've got IPs that belong to Amazon.com. I've got subdomains that belong to Amazon.com, right? The next one is Amaz. So Amaz is a very good tool that I use. It's an extensive framework. It has different modules in it, and right now we are using only the enumeration module. So they have the Intel module, the Viz module, and the Track module. You guys could probably individually look into those modules, but just for subdomain, we look at the enumeration part of what Amaz provides, right? Now these are sources that we use passively, right? So now when we are looking at actively getting or finding out, right, as the slide says, guessing or checking if these subdomains exist or do not exist, we would need a certain check, right? And that check comes in the form of a word list that we have provided to a particular tool that we use, right? So now for subdomain brute forcing, this would actually send a query from whatever machine you have to their name servers to actually check whether this subdomain actually exists or not, right? And those tools can you can use tools like Amaz or Shuffle DNS or Alt DNS, right? And just to brief you a little about Alt DNS, it's a very interesting tool that I found was, say for example, we are targeting example.com and you find dev.example.com, right? So if there is any numerical form of a numerical integer in the subdomain, it will actually recursively check for how many different kinds or different permutations and combinations of that particular subdomain, right? So if it's dev1.example.com, so it can check for dev2, dev3, and dev4, and so on, right? So it's basically guesswork and through finding out whether the subdomain exists or not, right? And this is a screenshot of verizonmedia.com using Amaz, and you can use different switches in the command, and you also get a display on the left hand side as to from where was the source of this particular subdomain, right? So now that we have all these subdomains, we would want to find out why or what technologies have they used, right? And really good tools that are out there are BuiltWith and Vapalizer. So these basically look at the databases that they have running, and all this information is actually taken from the headers, from the HTTP headers that host or are sent in the request that's being sent out or hosted. and you can get different details like programming languages, the libraries that they use, the databases that they use, the frameworks that they use, even analytics furthermore, right? Moving on to the getting different technologies that are hosted on those subdomains. So Shodan is an awesome place where you can get such information. It basically Shodan spiders the infrastructure of the internet, and it gives a lot of data to us in terms of IP, their certificate date, when it was do they have it and when was it issued. They have response dates that are given. They also tell us where their servers are being hosted, their technology stack in terms of whether they're using PHP or Apache or things along those lines, right? So now that we have these subdomains, how do we leverage them, right? Because not all of the subdomains would be active, right? So say if a company started 10 years back, they would not necessarily have certain subdomains that are active at this point of time, right? Because maybe they might have just hosted it up for, testing, or say if they wanted to transfer some files or things along those lines, right? So this is a very popular tool that's out there called HTTP probe, where it just goes and probes given a list of subdomains and checks for the 80 and 443 port, right? And you can specifically use a switch, which is -p, where you can put out, port 80 and 443, right? So we get the most relevant or active subdomains, right? Now that we have, the active subdomains, the next part would be to do a port scan on these subdomains and find out what services are being used. Now, there are multiple tools to do a port scan, but the most efficient one, what I find, is masscan. But the only limitation with masscan is that it only scans for IPs, right, and not domain names. So there's another tool that is called DN masscan, which takes a domain name and then scans all the ports on that, around 65,535 ports on that subdomain. And mind you that this only checks for open ports, right? We are not checking for what kind of service is running or what kind of version of that service is running, right? So this is just basically just to do one single job, and that's to find what open ports are available on that particular subdomain, right? So this is a quick display of DN masscan, where it takes in a list of subdomains. Now, from that list of subdomains, it gives us the IPs of those subdomains, and then additionally runs a port scan on those IPs, right? So you can correlate the IPs to the subdomains that it has outputted, right? Moving on to Nmap. Now, Nmap is a very versatile tool. Nmap has a lot of switches and a lot of features and functions that you can do with it. However, this I would use at a later stage, like after doing an enumeration or a port scan, because there are not all sensitive ports would be available on all subdomains, right? And if we find a very good, like a very juicy subdomain, we can actually use Nmap to scan that subdomain, and we can find out the services that are running on the subdomain and the versions of those services, right? So just for an example, I just did a simple version scan on scanme.nmap.org. So we see that it's running an open SSH port, and that open SSH is running 6.6 port 1, right? And it's running on an Ubuntu system, right? So we can obviously check if there are any CVEs for 6.6.1, or even if it's different, right? Like it's running Apache also as well, right? 2.4.7. So we can check for any active CVEs on this kind of front, and this is where Nmap actually shines in terms of giving us more data and being more versatile in its approach, for with regards to a port scan, right? So now that we have a good list and a good amount of information, we have the active subdomains, We have the port scans done on those active subdomains. But say if you have a list of 300 or 400 subdomains, right, that you're looking at, and it's a kind of a tedious task to, load those subdomains in a browser and individually, put it in a browser, basically, right? So the next tool that's very useful in this case would be Aquatone. So Aquatone is a tool that has, again, multiple things. You can port scan with them. You can, take screenshots, which we use it for now. And this is very good in terms of, just getting a bird's eye view of that particular subdomain, right? And you can also have additional information where it gives you header information and open ports and HTTP headers and things along those lines, right? So Aquatone is, again, a very useful tool in getting a bird's eye view and what is being hosted on that particular subdomain, right? So let's just take a break and let's just look at the information that we have right now, right? So we have identified that, the domains in scope are either the .com or the .in or the .org. We have identified active subdomains from that TLD. We've done a port scan and we have taken screenshots of that subdomain, right? So now we would probably move into a web application analysis, right? So this is just a basic analysis of what you can do. Yes, it is intrusive, and we'll get to know in further slides. So number one, right? So now that we have a list of subdomains, right? So we would want to see whether it can be taken over or not, right? So this is, again, one of my primary checks when I look at a subdomain. So just to put it in a simple way, a subdomain is an asset that was being used by a company. However, at present, it is not. And whatever contents that's there on that, on that subdomain, it still has a DNS record, right? And that DNS record is the CNAME. Now, to give you a real life example of it, let's say that you own a bike and the RC card and the the documents of the bike were on your name, right? But now you have sold that bike to someone else, right? But that someone else is still riding that bike with your name, right? And if that person gets caught, your name is going to come up on the system, right? So this is there are a lot of instances where attackers or hackers have actually hosted malicious things on subdomains, and this would legitimately tell a user that this is an authentic subdomain of example.com, right? And there's an awesome tool that you can use called Can I Take Over XYZ? This is by Ed Overflow. It's really good, and I encourage you guys to use it. The next one would be to get JavaScript files, right? So we know that once an application is being hosted, there are n number of JavaScript files that are there in the source code and that are referenced in the web application itself, right? So what we do is, so you would be wondering as to why do we actually look at the JavaScript files, right? So sometimes, developers have a lot of responsibilities that they do, and they might have probably hard-coded credentials, in those files. There are APIs that could be hidden in those files. There could be probably unauthenticated URLs that are in those files that could have information that that is disclosed, right? So what we do is we look at the JavaScript files that are there in the web application, right? And there are different tools that you can use. You can use Sub.js, JS Finder, and Get.js. So these are, again, tools that do additional things. So if, for example, JS Finder, extracts URLs and subdomains from JavaScript files, right? So say if on example.com, in example.com of in a JavaScript file, there could be additional subdomains in that JavaScript file referenced on example.com, right? So that's a little recursive in a way, but that's a really good insight to have, right? So this is a quick screenshot of sub.js where, given a list of subdomains, it lists out all the JavaScript files, right? Now, analyzing the JavaScript files, right? So as I said earlier that, in the JavaScript files, we can get a lot of, sensitive endpoints. We can get API keys, we can get secrets, whatever is being referenced in that JavaScript file, right? And the way we do this is, we can do it manually, where you can just, Control F and search for, the keyword, or you can use a tool called Link Finder, right? So Link Finder is basically a Python script that finds out endpoints in a JavaScript file, right? And this could be, a cloud storage endpoint or an admin dashboard or anything that is sensitive in the JavaScript file. And you can also probably put in word lists where it checks for certain sensitive URLs, right? Another one is in terms of analyzing JavaScript files is Secret Finder. So again, we do the same thing. We remove, we gather all the JavaScript files. This is another Python script where we look at API keys, access token, JWT tokens, things along those lines, right? The next comes to web content discovery. So this is a very interesting thing where you have multiple tools out there, but these are just three that I've listed over here called GoBuster, DirSearch, and FF. So what we're trying to do is that looking at those subdomains, there are different directories that are hosted on those subdomains, and not all those directories can be configured properly, right? So we are looking at low-hanging fruits in terms of, say, directory listings, admin panels, sensitive directories that's leaking information, say if it's a temporary directory or a backup directory, or even a, like any, so say if it's a user login page and, you put in credentials and it probably saves it for some reason in a directory, right, on that website. So this is something that comes in a lot, and with looking at content discovery, you can get, it opens up your the doors to finding a lot more vulnerabilities and a lot more parameters that you can fuzz, right? So this was a tweet by one of my dear friends. He put it up on Twitter. So he actually found the RCE on one of the assets that he was looking at. So it just started out from a simple directory listing where he used, web content discovery to find out. From that directory listing, he looked at the JavaScript files, and in those JavaScript files, he got hidden endpoints. Now, in those JavaScript files, there were hidden endpoints and hidden parameters also as well, right? So these parameters were executing on a server side, right? And whatever we are interacting with is the client side. So he was playing around with those parameters, and he found an RCE to an Apache Solar version 6.0.0. And yeah, so that is it. And thank you very much.
I hope we can move the discussion on to forum, and you can take the questions there, right, Charlton?
Yeah, sure. I mean, can we hang on for like another 5 minutes or something?
Yeah,
If
sure.
someone yeah. Just like a raise of hands or something.
Yeah, Rahul. I think yeah, Charlton. If someone has a question, they can raise their hands.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, even you all can put it up on the chat also as well. That should be.
Charlton, you have a question on chat. Bro, Charlton, you're on mute. Actually, can you take the question?
Okay, yeah, yeah. Actually, I was typing it to him, but yeah, Aryan, I don't. I mean, I have used it only on JavaScript files. I don't think so that I mean, I'm definitely going to give it a try, but I haven't taken that around.
Okay. So if you have any questions, type it in the chat or questions.
I think so. We can possibly like personally talk, Aryan.
Okay, cool. I think no more questions, I guess. So, yeah, Charlton, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Al.